This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We're continuing our conversation with Robert Kuttner, co-founder and co-editor of The American Prospect, to talk about another of his recent articles. This one headlined, "Is the Press Next?" Kuttner writes, quote, "As Trump tries to destroy one free institution after another, universities, law firms, independent public agencies, trade unions, sooner or later he will come for the press," Kuttner writes. And Trump's attacks on the press have already begun. In December, ABC News settled a defamation suit filed by President-elect Trump instead of taking the case to court. As part of the deal, ABC will donate $15 million to Trump's presidential library. The White House has also banned the Associated Press from covering some presidential events over its refusal to refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. After suffering a court setback, the White House moved to restrict access to all of the wire services.
President Trump has also repeatedly attacked 60 Minutes, CBS's flagship investigative news program. Trump has urged the Federal Communications Commission to pull CBS's license. And in his personal capacity, Trump has filed a $20 billion lawsuit against CBS over how 60 Minutes edited an interview with Kamala Harris last year. This all comes as CBS's parent company, Paramount Global, is seeking FCC approval for its proposed $8 billion merger with Skydance Media. Earlier this week, there was a major shakeup at 60 Minutes. The show's executive producer, Bill Owens, resigned, saying, quote, "Over the past months, it's become clear that I would not be allowed to run the show as I have always run it, to make independent decisions based on what was right for 60 Minutes, right for the audience," he said. Semaphore has reported Paramount's Shari Redstone had begun personally keeping tabs on 60 Minutes segments about Trump. Robert Kuttner of The American Prospect is still with us, along with Maria Ressa, co-founder and CEO of the Philippine independent news site Rappler, who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021 for her work defending free expression in the Philippines. Robert Kuttner, we're going to start with you, laying out what is taking place here when you have 60 Minutes head leaving, saying he can no longer ensure its independence, and you have this merger that Shari Redstone is trying to accomplish with Larry Ellison, the Oracle founder, and his son, David Ellison, known Trump allies. Talk about all of this.
Well, my worry is that this is just the beginning. If they wanted to become really systematic, in this article, "Is the Press Next?" I ticked off all the things they might do. So the first thing they might do is they might go after the nonprofit tax-exempt status of much of the progressive media, so-called 501c3 status, that allows you to get foundation grants. And to be a 501c3, you're not supposed to be political. And, you know, just between us and your audience, a lot of the left press is pretty tough on Trump, as it ought to be. So Trump could go to the now. It's illegal for the president to, abruptly pull the tax exemption of any organization. But you could get the IRS to launch an investigation, and you could find that shock, several progressive media are actually pretty critical of Trump, and maybe they don't deserve a 501c3 status. That in turn would spook their foundations, because they're also 501c3s, they're tax exempt, and you could threaten their tax exemption. So that's just one thing he could do. You already have a kind of anticipatory capitulation, appeasement on the part of big corporate owners of the Washington Post and the LA Times. And sometimes the New York Times feels like it's pulling its punches, because when a billionaire owns a media property, I hate the word, they have their other business interests to look out for, Shari Redstone being a classical example. So you've got self-censorship. That's a second evil. You've also got the fact that, public broadcasting broadcasts on frequencies that are allocated by the FCC. The FCC could say, hey, actually, we need those frequencies for national security purposes, and public radio stations, you don't get to broadcast over the air anymore.
And Congress has already started an investigation into PBS and NPR.
That's correct. So Trump could play hardball. Now, the good news here is this is protected by the First Amendment. And in the last segment, we talked about briefly the Supreme Court discovering the fact that its primary job is to uphold the rule of law, and it doesn't get any more fundamental than the First Amendment. So that might slow down Trump. The other interesting thing is that more and more and more Americans get their news, regardless of what the original news source is, from the internet. They don't read newspapers anymore, and a lot of listeners to public radio listen on the internet. It's harder to censor the internet. And you could imagine media gravitating to the internet. Even the Chinese Communist Party had trouble creating what was called the Great Firewall of China to keep Chinese citizens from accessing the internet. So I don't think he's going to put the free press out of business, but I think we need to be vigilant.
Well, I'd like to get Maria Ressa to comment on what's happening in the U.S. as well. Of course, you have devoted your life to fighting for free expression in the Philippines, for which you were awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 2021. So if you could talk first about your site, Rappler, the repeated attempts by the Duterte government to have you imprisoned, several, 10, I believe, arrest warrants issued against you, and how, despite all of that, you kept Rappler running throughout.
Yeah, no, first, thank you for having me. But, you know, let me just be a little bit more dire than Robert. I just came from Perugia, from the International Journalism Festival, where VDEM, which does kind of a rating of all democracies globally, right? Their latest report now says that 72% of the world is under autocratic rule. Like, we have elected illiberal leaders in 72% in these democracies around the world, right?
How do they classify the U.S.?
The U.S. is, so here's what he said. The head of VDEM publicly said that if the trends in America continue, that he expects democracy to die by the summer. Like, not just to wake you up, right? Like, literally. And actually, if we stop normalizing the death by 1,000 cuts of rule of law, you can see this happening, right? For the Turkish grad student picked up from the streets, from Tufts University, from all of the little things. We've talked here about the press. The press was attacked in the first Trump administration, right? Duterte echoed President Trump. President Trump echoed Duterte. Enemies of the people. That's what they both called us. But the point here is, we normalize new depths. Like, we should not be where we are, and yet that's where we are. And what are you seeing being created? At the early days, in the first month, I called it the Philippinization of American politics, but I think it's even worse, because what you're seeing, not many mainstream media covered the government pausing the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, right? Essentially telling Americans that it's okay to be corrupt because you need to be competitive. These are the ideals that are being broken down. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the creation of a kleptocracy. The last part here is, Robert talked about the internet, but these big tech companies, the broligarchy, who were there in the front row, right?
At his inauguration.
The design of social media, and this was a clip you ran in the tease at the beginning, it literally turns the incentive structure upside down, is on the side of a populist dictator to be, right? Because why? In 2018, MIT said that lies spread 6 times faster. That was before Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it to X and turned it into a human cesspool, even worse than it was in 2018. So if lies spread 6 times faster, and fear, anger, and hate, this is across the world. If you use fear, anger, and hate, it spreads and I put rabbit ears on information, the post spreads virally. Right? So there are more ways. Online violence is real world violence. The reason why 72% of the world today is now under authoritarian rule is partly because our public information ecosystem is corrupted. Good morning.